Hello folks, it's 4:30 Newfoundland time, and I am in fact your friend, Ardent Party. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, given that it's Turnover Tuesday, we're going to talk a little bit about things that these two places have in common. Yes, I know. You're saying to yourself, Ardent, that's Texas and Newfoundland. There's not a lot of commonality there. You might be surprised. For example, as you can see, our flags have similar color schemes. Granted, the Texas flag has a much prettier symbol, given that it's got an actual star. For those of you who are looking at the flag and thinking, gee, that looks weird, because the star is not 2 points down, this is actually the way it's supposed to be shown in a memorial style, if you hang it vertically, as I understand it. The problem with the Newfoundland flag is that it doesn't have a vertical orientation preference in terms of which side goes to which side. It simply is what it is. My personal feeling would be that this could be a much more attractive flag if they were combined, which, of course, is kind of the point of this. Though, to be fair, this was very early on when I began making flags for fun. And had I had it back, there are a bunch of changes I would have made. Not least of which would have been to make the star slightly smaller, obviously slightly less jagged. I'm working with MS Paint, give me a break, it's all I can manage. I would have completely replicated this part of the Newfoundland flag, rather than leave it cut off square. And rather than use the slogan Fraternitas et Fortitudine, which at the time I thought meant brotherhood and strength, I most likely would have used something more along the lines of Iustus nihil timiat, which basically means the righteous need fear nothing. It kind of tells you why I'm trans-Texan. And that's part of the fun with this that I'm having, is just to explain the whole trans-Texan sort of deal a little bit. Also to talk about one of the things that both our jurisdictions have in common, and that is that we both used to be our own country. I'll actually start with Texas rather than Canada, or Newfoundland, sorry. But Texas was its own country, as I recall. Okay, I'm actually going to end up using Wikipedia for this, and I do apologize. I thought I had selected a good source at this point. Apparently I have not. Apparently Wikipedia loves folklore, as long as it's not... I can't even make that out, so yeah. In any case, and I do apologize if my voice is a little low. I'm going to have a look at increasing that at the moment. Oh, cancel that. Let's see here. There we are. And I'll just increase my volume. The standard 25%. I do apologize if I am now deafening you. But normally I find that my voice does not rise into the yellow, let alone the red, on the microphone readout on my OBS. So, taking no chances. In any case, Texas was an independent country known as the Republic of Texas, my apologies, from 1836 to 1846. En Espanol, was the República de Texas. And I do apologize if my Spanish is absolutely atrocious. I do speak it with a Newfoundland accent. And this would have been, let me bring up this map, this would have been the territory claimed by Texas. This would have been the Republic of Texas, and the modern state is roughly this and about there, I believe. This looks like it extends up into New Mexico. Of course, Mexico was considered much larger at the time, or was much larger at the time, which I suspect would be an interesting piece of history to look at. In any case, I did just want to talk about that briefly and mention that in reference to the there we go. In reference to the story I really want to cover, which is Newfoundland having been its own country. Oops. And one of the things I did have a bit of trouble with was determining which flag exactly Newfoundland would have been using during the period of its independence. Obviously, we have this one here, which is the flag of Newfoundland and Labrador as a province. But this has only been adopted 40 years or so ago, so not really a particularly ancient symbol, to say the least. Not a lot of historical value, though it does hold a certain degree of sentimental value to me, as this is the flag I remember the most. It's not the flag I was born under, but it is the one I remember the most. And I was fortunate enough to have met Christopher Pratt before he passed away, quite some time ago. And they talk here about the various symbols and usages within the interesting. This part I did not know. Huh. I did know it had an intentional overall resemblance to the Union Jack, as we do have a historic connection to Britain. However, this flag, the red ensign, and I'll zoom in on that section there so you can get a look at what the medal says. Haec tibi dona ferro, and if I recall correctly, it is what gifts we bring. Though I'm not 100% sure, and because I can do this in real time, I will actually check. I do believe it translates loosely as these gifts we bring, or what gifts we bring. Essentially talking about the resource wealth of the province. Or of the country, rather. There is a red ensign, which was officially endorsed by King Charles in 1674, though that was not the original flag of Newfoundland. Or sorry, this would have been the original flag of Newfoundland for the military, as I understand it. And then no, my apologies. I was about to say that I thought the blue one was the civil ensign. However, old oil paintings show red ensigns flying from the topmast of Grand Bank's schooners, which is interesting. That means that this would have been the original. I guess because and I'll just put my face back on for just a moment. I guess because it was essentially a royal enterprise, so essentially a crown enterprise. And I suppose potentially, given that the king was the overall commander of the military, it would count as a military endeavor. In fact, there were what were called fishing admirals who oversaw the governing of the colony in its earliest days. I suppose that's why the red, which is normally a military color, was used for Grand Bank's schooners. Let me just hide my face again. In any event, the Union flag, of course, would have been adopted in 1931 and was Newfoundland's national flag until Confederation with Canada in 1949. It was then readopted as the official provincial flag in 1952, used officially until 1980. Now, I've seen other discussions about the flag. This is the Newfoundland tricolor. This was never actually used as an official banner of Newfoundland. It was the Fishermen's Star of the Sea Association. Yeah. So it was a charitable organization that originally used it. And of course, we have the flag of the Fédération des Francophones de Terre et du Labrador, the Labrador flag, the Nunavut flag, and other various symbols. But as I said initially, the initial reason I was covering this for Terra Nova Tuesday was because I wanted to talk about how Newfoundland had originally been its own country. These people say they get asked all the time if Newfoundland used to be its own country and what country Newfoundland belongs to. The history of Newfoundland is pretty rich, and as far as Canadian provinces go, it's the most unique. It's also the longest in terms of actual connection to Europe. Newfoundland was the first part of the New World, as far as I know, settled by the British Isles, if not Europeans in general. Also, there is a fairly well confirmed, though not 100% perfect, indication that the Vikings were present on the island portion of Newfoundland sometime in around the year 1000, give or take. I don't believe there was any sort of official record. Excuse me. But as I understand it, the theory goes that the native population supposedly drove them off. Whether that's true or it was simply the brutal conditions in Newfoundland that made it untenable as a colony, I don't know. There certainly wasn't anywhere really close by to go and raid that would have been useful for the Vikings. Let me see here. I'll bring this one back up. And of course, these folks talk about Heritage Newfoundland becoming a province, things like that. This is actually quite a short bit of piece here, so I'm actually going to have a look at Newfoundland and Labrador on Wikipedia. I do apologize, I'm not a big fan of Wikipedia, but generally when it comes to things like this, there's not a lot of political interference. I won't really touch too much on the history of it. As I said, I'm already at 13 minutes, and I don't intend to go much beyond 15, so in any case, I'm looking for Dominion. Let's see here. Newfoundland. There we go. Dominion of Newfoundland. So, Newfoundland was a British Dominion in eastern North America. Today is the modern Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. The name Newfoundland and Labrador was not changed from Newfoundland until, if I recall correctly, around 2000. The Balfour Declaration of 1926 was issued by the Imperial Conference of the British Empire Leaders in London, named after Arthur Balfour, Lord President of the Council. It declared the United Kingdom and the Dominions to be whatever. The Statute of Westminster sets the basis for the relationship between the Commonwealth realms and the Crown. Actually thinking that might be interesting to look at later. So, at this point, Newfoundland and Labrador were considered separate. I think, though it's difficult... Oh, no, sorry. This is talking about the Dominion. So the Dominion itself included the island of Newfoundland and the region known as Labrador on the continental mainland, which you can see here. Though that's not a great picture. Let's just go here and see what we can find here. Now, for those of you who used to watch the old Indiana Jones movies, he would fly from New York to St. John's and then on to either Reykjavik or... sorry, no, that's Greenland, so that wouldn't be Reykjavik. Reykjavik would be over here in Iceland. But he'd fly essentially there to London, Paris, if he was headed south to Africa, possibly Portugal. Though generally that trip would have been very, very challenging. Mercator projections can be a little deceptive in terms of the distances. though this isn't a terrible one. But anytime you see, say, one of the older films or films that portray older eras, you will see that generally anything before 1960s-ish, you will see that if they're doing a transatlantic flight, almost all the time, Newfoundland is involved in some fashion. Generally, that's because at the time, Newfoundland was the hub for transatlantic air travel, at least in the North Atlantic, which is one of the reasons that I don't think we should have surrendered our status as an independent country at the time. In 1934, Newfoundland did, in fact, become the only dominion to give up its self-governing status, which ended 79 years of self-government. The abolition of self-government came about because of a crisis in Newfoundland's public finances in 1932, which, of course, would have been the same crisis that was affecting everyone at the time, but we won't talk about that. Newfoundland had accumulated a significant amount of debt by building a railway across the island, which was known as the Newfie Bullet by the American soldiers, partly as a derogatory thing, because it did in fact run slower than the trains in the Americas, or in the American mainland, for two reasons. One, it was built with a smaller gauge, hence after the British usage, which made it very difficult for interprovincial shipping later. You couldn't take a rail car from a train that had come from the Canadian mainland and simply connect it to a train here in Newfoundland. It wasn't possible, simply because they would not work together. The tracks were different gauges, essentially different sizes. And actually, I believe I was quite young when the Newfoundland Railway closed. 1988, so I would have been about 12. And as you can see, this is the track, and I have been, when I lived in Port aux Basques, doing my cabinet making apprenticeship, or my cabinet making training, I should say. I had the opportunity to go and visit some of the old areas. Let me see. Would have been along this section of the track. I was living in the Caudroy Valley at the time. If by chance you happen to be in Newfoundland and have never gone to the Caudroy Valley, you should go and see it at least once in your life. It is absolutely beautiful. If you're planning to visit Newfoundland from somewhere else, the Caudroy Valley is not a bad choice. In any case, we'll close that again and go back to what I was talking about before. There we are. So, unlike... Actually, I'm not 100% certain how Texas came to join the United States. I don't know if it was a military or a political changeover. In Newfoundland's case, it was a political changeover, though there is a... how to put it? I would say a small degree of questionability to the entire process, to the point that several people have written books or screenplays talking about how it was questionable. I personally don't know for certain. I do know that there is a fine quote of Joey Smallwood, the father of Newfoundland Confederation, stating, quote, that Newfoundland joining Canada was the closest he could see it being to becoming communist. And I think you guys all know my views about communism by this point. If you don't, see that flag. Yeah. In any case, there's a few other little bits and bobs. I personally think that the Ode to Newfoundland is definitely the most beautiful national anthem that's ever been written and should continue to be used. Obviously, I covered earlier, possibly earlier this year, a story about how the local university had stopped using the anthem due to, well, we'll just call it wokeness and move on from there. Let me see here. Okay, so it does in fact say that the red ensign that Newfoundland's Dominion flew was the civil flag from 1907 to 1931. Let me go back. The Union flag, the Union Jack, would have been the flag that I was born under, ironically. And also the flag that my father was born under, and he was actually born a British citizen. Yes. I just had to look at some of the dates. But yeah, while this is a very attractive flag, it's not bad, I suppose. Oops. There we go. Though I didn't mean to make it quite that big. In any case, oops, that's not quite what I wanted. There we are. Okay. In any case, folks, that's really all I've got for Terra Nova Tuesday this week. Actually, no. I have a thought. And I'm going to enact that thought right now. I had intended to have a quick look at Twitter. Or, more accurately, Newfoundland's place on Twitter. And see what we have for Twitter. So we will put that back where it belongs. And we will go to Twitter on my account. And let's have a look at... Oh dear, I've screwed that up slightly. I accidentally closed that window before I meant to. So, there. Okay. And if you're wondering what the chrysanthemum core is, well, let's put it this way. It was either name my fan base myself or allow others to do it. And I really like this color scheme, so yeah. Also, if you're wondering about the Latin here, Calvus Audax Pulcher. It means, if I recall correctly, bald, bold, and beautiful. In any case, on Twitter, I am going to do a quick search. That's not what I'm looking for. Oh, there we go. And to be fair, I spend so little time on Twitter, it's kind of hard for me to remember. And yeah, I have searched for Jeremy Clarkson in the past. But this time we're going to try Newfoundland. And we will throw in the additional search term, Newfoundland independence. Malta, Hong Kong would have stayed British had it voted in 1997. A subdivision of Kenya wanted to. Newfoundland did. Maybe, maybe not. Curious what that's a response to, though. Over 50 countries have left the British Empire. None has asked to return. Yeah, that's actually not true. Okay. 12th of April, 1782, Paris, France. Peace negotiations. Nothing about Newfoundland there. Newfoundland and Labrador. Nadia Sarwar says Newfoundland and Labrador's connection to the First World War similar to the Bangladesh War of Independence. Take your word for it. Carrie Claire says she wishes Newfoundland had an Independence Day. I actually have news for Carrie Claire. Carrie, oops, my apologies. Carrie, you may be interested to know that Newfoundland, in fact, has a Memorial Day of its own, which is July 1st. In Canada, that's Flag Day. We celebrate Memorial Day in the first half of the day, and, Canada Day, not Flag Day. Canada Day in the afternoon. Newfoundland never declared independence from the British Empire. We were granted our independence as a dominion, and then surrendered that back to Britain, and then debatably were sold to Canada. Let's see what this is. Silliness. Okay. Does every province have an independence movement? Yes. And Ontario actually does as well. In fact, I love how when I type in Canadian provincial independence movements, Wikipedia decides to give me secessionist movements of Canada. Close enough. We have Alberta, BC, Maritimes, New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'll open that in a separate link. We'll go to that in just a moment. The proposed state. No, not really. But we have Western Canada, autonomous movements. Interesting. I guess Ontario actually doesn't. Then again, Ontario thinks it is Canada, to be fair. People in Toronto suffer from the navel gazing issue. Let me see here. There is a secessionist movement in Newfoundland based on its unique history and as a result of its grievances and broken promises with both federal and government of Quebec. Prior to 49, the area was a self-governing dominion. Not exactly true. It is true, but not exactly fully true. It's not the whole truth. Let's be fair there. The root of our trouble is centered in the relationship between the two countries, between Newfoundland as a country and Canada, according to James Halley, a former lawyer involved in negotiating a deal to get Newfoundland into Canada in 1949. Unfortunately, the two Newfoundland nationalist attitudes have been severely compromised, and the memory of our independence, as short-lived as it may have been, is, I suppose the right way to say it would be rapidly fading as new generations come along, and many Newfoundlanders seem too content in my view, to depend on the government to take care of them, as opposed to being angry enough to demand that the government get the hell out of the way and let us make our own ways. Not necessarily as a province being independent, even on an individual level. I think people need to be able to run their own businesses with less government interference, less oversight, less regulation, certainly less taxation. A good example, and it's one I revisit on a fairly regular basis in conversation, is the first person to sell legal marijuana in Canada was a gentleman, if I recall correctly, from Torbay here in Newfoundland. In the first year that he was in operation, his revenue, his intake of funds, was well over $1 million. Not surprising. Marijuana being legalized for the first time, well, not necessarily for the first time, but for the first time in a very long time in Canada. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people using it. So there's going to be a lot of people buying it. Unfortunately, as he pointed out in an interview with one of the local news services, may have been CBC, I suspect it was NTV, as he pointed out, there was so much regulation and red tape and government fees, etc. He ended up profiting under $90,000, possibly as little as $80,000. That's kind of sickening. The amount of money that individual could have pumped into Newfoundland's economy by himself, if he'd been in business for 10 years, you're looking at $10 million raked in. Ish. That's enough to put a sizable beating on Newfoundland's provincial debt. At least it was at the time. Provincial and national debts having skyrocketed massively since. But in any case, this is going to be talking about the rationale for the secessionist movement here in Newfoundland. According to a July 2003 report, secessionism was on the rise. Yes. In 2004, there was a, quote, flag... Sorry, YouTube. That was a mispronunciation of the word flag. There was a flag flap. Not the other thing that doesn't have L's. Occurred when the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Danny Williams, this individual here, closest to Trump Newfoundland has ever produced, removed all Canadian flags from government buildings and raised provincial flags instead. The reason that happened was due to a dispute with Ottawa over, if I recall correctly, whether or not Newfoundland should continue to receive equalization transfer payments. For some reason, Newfoundland had been ruled a have province. when it never has been. Kind of the same way that Quebec is a have-not province, even though it never has been. Let's see here. Tensions have since eased. Here we are. A non-organized movement has emerged among citizens, and the ability of potential premiers to appeal to a strong sense of Newfoundland nationalism is imperative to forming a government. No, it's not. If you wanted to appeal to Newfoundland nationalism, you'd be called a Nazi. You'd immediately be called a white supremacist or some sort of racist if you said Newfoundland should be proud of being who it is. Obviously, the optics of such a move is insanely bad. The secessionist movement is most commonly associated with a flag under several names, including the pink, white, and green flag of the Republic of Newfoundland and Labrador, or officially as the Newfoundland tricolor. Again, this has never been an official flag of Newfoundland. This was the invention of, if I recall correctly, depending on who you believe the origin story of, this was a parish priest in St. John's who had created this flag to attempt to unite the Irish, the native Newfoundlanders, and the English immigrants. By native Newfoundlanders, they mean people born native to the island under the English system. So that's a little bit about that. What else have we got from Twitter? Actually, this time we'll just delete independence and see what comes up. CBC, The Telegram, Booking.com, not interested. I can't talk about this on screen, but what I can do is open that in a new tab and move that over to the other window where I will look at it later. Oops, sorry about that. Ah, yes. The terrifying creature known as the Newfoundland dog. And apparently Jordan Peterson has been here. He was with Rex. Documentary coming soon. How old is this? February 4th. It'll be good to see. Jim Gaffigan.
Worldwide time zones are done by the hour.
Yeah, but we're Newfies.
We'll go half hour.
Thanks, Jim. And of course, Newfoundland is known for some of the most spectacular scenery in the New World. And a very interesting police force on occasion. And that is actually a pretty good picture of St. John's. Here is the rooms, which I mentioned before. If I recall correctly, this is St. John's Basilica, though I could have that wrong. And our downtown core is generally here. This picture looks to have been taken from somewhere in... Well, there's Jelly Bean Row, this area. So I'm going to guess this is kind of city center. And because I'm well over half an hour, I think it's time I actually cut this off. So I will leave you with one of the... this is a picture from... I definitely do not want to do this without giving credit. Gord Follett Photography, who I will throw a follow. And leave you with this image. So this is actually some of the stark beauty that Newfoundland is capable of. This probably happens to be a warm summer day as opposed to a cold wintry day like today. In any case, folks, as I always say, I hope you're doing well. I hope you continue to do well. And rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye. Yes, I would like to